Welcome to the Stuck Mic AvCast. My name is Carl Valerian. I'll be your host today. You know, when we're obtaining a pilot certificate, it's really a license to learn, but there's a few things we wish we knew before we passed our check ride. In this episode, we're going to discuss what we wish we were taught during our flight training to fly safer and operate more efficiently in the system. And before we get started, though, one of the things I want to say is a big shout out to our sponsor. Without our sponsors, we couldn't put this show together. And today's sponsor is Stratus Financial. Stratus Financial is where dreams take flight. They are going to offer loans to people for flight training, and they understand your needs because they are pilots. And you can find out more at stratus.finance. And as a sponsor of this podcast, Stratus Financial is giving away scholarships guides, and they're giving you one for free by using the coupon code STRATUS. You can visit stuckmicavcast.com/free to find out more about that scholarships guide for free. You know, whether you're financing your dream of flying or simplifying the process by taking care of your student loans, their efficient, hassle-free funding can connect you to a life of your dreams of becoming a professional pilot sooner than you ever thought possible. To find out more, go to stratus.finance. Well, let's move on to the cruise flight. Well, joining me today is actually some of our favorite co-hosts. Well, they're all our favorite co-hosts. Joining us from Pinellas Park is Tom Frick, and from Sevierville is James Spearman, and Leslie Cauble is actually from Bentonville, Arkansas, in a brand new spot. Guys, it's great to see everybody on today, and we're going to get started because we have a lot of stuff to talk about here. And what we're going to do is one of the people that was the one that really spurred this conversation was Leslie, and we're going to let Leslie take it away into the cruise flight, and we're going to go through some of the things that we wish we learned as student pilots. So take it away, Leslie.
All right. Well, my husband John and I were talking one day about some of those things and experiences that we did not have as student pilots, and some of them well on into after we became private pilots. And so as an instructor now, when I teach my students, I'm trying to implement some of these things into the syllabus for our private pilot students. And many of them I didn't, one thing we're going to talk about is handling your aircraft at max gross weight. You know, when you do that first solo, your instructor hops out of the seat and your plane takes off like a rocket ship. But, I remember that first time that I was really pushing the envelope, and it kind of took my breath away and kind of scared me a little bit, to be honest. So if you can explore some of these things with your instructor or instructors, speaking to you too, take some of these ideas, do them with your students, and it's just going to set them up for some good experiences, and they're going to be able to know how to do some of these things when they become a private pilot and they're out there on their own, with their families and their friends and by themselves. So we do have a long list. We're going to get right to it. So the first one is to actually fly on a grass strip or soft field operations. Maybe it's a sandbar, or in the next to the water and out in Alaska. So all of us as student pilots, we have to do soft field takeoffs and landings, right? But not many people get to actually land on a grass field. So Tom, why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
So it's funny. I like the way that you introduced that, because as an instructor, I now have experienced all of these things and was trying to think back at the things that I hadn't done early on. And that was one of them, landing on a grass strip. As a matter of fact, the flight school that I was flying at had a policy that they didn't want their planes on a grass strip. They wouldn't even allow us to go there. So we did all of our short field and soft field stuff all on concrete because they wouldn't allow us to go on grass. I actually didn't fly on grass until I had gotten my tailwheel endorsement, which was, I think, after my instrument. So, the idea of being able to find a grass strip, that's probably one of those things that I would ask these days. If I was trying to fly into flight school, do you allow your planes to go to soft field landings, actual grass? Or even better yet, I heard you mention like sandbars and stuff like that. That'd be awesome. I don't think I've landed on a sandbar yet.
Yeah, me either. One of our co-hosts, Bill English, has just joined us. Bill, so glad you're here. And I know you had something you wanted to add about the grass strips or soft field takeoffs and landings.
Yes, I do. Not only do we do it, I pretty much require it. My airplane is on a grass strip, 11 miles up north of Big Red here. Just this morning, I was out with a student barely soloed. I think she had her second solo. So we start working on shorts and softs. So we went to not one, not two, three grass airfields today for some landings with her. So yeah, it's great. And it's not just, the learning the soft technique, like you see in the ACS, keep the nose up and make it soft and everything, which is great. Hey, guess what? Those things are really good when you're landing on pavement too. So they're skills you're going to use everywhere. And it really helps you feel the airplane. That student this morning, I could see a dramatic difference from yesterday to after a half a dozen different real grass landings today.
Those are some great points. And, another reason why we do this practice as a student pilot and why you should continue practicing this technique as you go on in your aviation journey is in case you have that emergency one day and you've got to put the plane down in a grass field. And if you've never done it before, that's just one more thing to add to the anxiety of the moment. Carl, do you have anything to add before we move on?
Yeah, one thing that I want to add to that is the fact that, not just grass strips, but half grass strips. I mean, I've flown out of a lot of fields where we had half pavement, half grass, or half grass, half sand. So understanding what's going to happen and at what speeds things are going to happen. And when you get faster, what sand's going to be like or what grass is going to be like. So it's always good sometimes to fly out of those half and half airports, I call them. So that's just another thing that you want to maybe try with some of your instructors someday.
Interesting. I'm going to have to find one of those fields and try that out. I've never done that before. Yeah. All right. Well, let's move on to the next one. The next one is self-serve fuel. So fueling your own aircraft. Now, personally, this is something that I never experienced as a student pilot. We were running our flight school back in Jonesboro, Arkansas. We always had line service. And I just never got the opportunity. And I never actually, not intentionally, flew to a field that had self-serve fuel. So it wasn't until I moved to Maui and my instructor said, okay, let's taxi on up to the fuel farm over here and I'll let you fill up. And I was just like, I don't know what to do. And I literally had to YouTube it. I remember watching my dad years and years ago before I started flying fuel up his Cessna 182, but I didn't pay much attention to it. So that's something that, instructors, that's something easy to do with your student is, go to another field. If you always get line service, at your home airport, go to another field where there's self-serve fuel and teach your student how to do that. Now, I have hired some CFIs in the past for our flight school in Maui, and these CFIs came from Part 141 schools, not to, disrespect the 141 schools, but, they were kind of deer in the headlights. They had never put fuel in their own aircraft before. Anybody want to jump in and have any more comments to make on that?
I tell you, that's actually something we, interestingly, the FBO manager here, I asked him for some input, and I'm going to have another thing later, but that was one of the biggest things that he said is that people just have no idea how to fuel their aircraft. And even at the smaller, schools, I mean, you may never know how to put fuel in your plane. I've seen schools with just a couple airplanes where they have this incredible service, but they're kind of doing us a little bit of a disservice because I never get a chance to learn how to put fuel or oil in the airplane. So it's not just the big schools. There's a lot of different situations. I think fuel in your aircraft is just a big thing I think everybody needs to learn. I agree with that, Leslie.
Yeah, very true. James, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to say tips there. Number one, don't fill it all the way to the brim. You want to stop about a quarter of an inch or an inch below the actual cap. Most people, they'll fill it all the way past it. And then number two, the cheapest gas isn't always what you're hunting for. I'll see people, they'll fly an extra 45 minutes to get cheaper gas, but a lot of accidents occur because of contamination in tanks. So I would you kind of want to find a middle of the road to make sure that the place is actually doing their checks and cleaning the filters and doing a good job, not exactly just the cheapest fuel possible. Your life's involved too, so.
Yeah, those are some great tips how to do your self-serve fuel, and maybe we can get more into detail on that on another future episode. So the next one is flying a right traffic pattern. And I know that sounds kind of weird because so many people have that experience. The only time you want to do that, because of course, left traffic pattern is the standard, at the airports you go to, unless it's noted in the sectional, in the airport facility directory, or if you get an instruction to do that by the control tower. But I know for me, this is another one of those that I never flew right traffic and had that kind of different point of view until well into my instrument training and at our new home airport over in Kahului. So, Bill, you want to talk about that? Is that something, do you have right traffic on any of your runways at your home airport?
Yeah, we're not short on right traffic here at Leesburg. We've one of the runways that pretty well sets up for that. We're a little bit of a trick with that, though. You mentioned don't be doing that unless you're directed by the tower. Just because it's convenient isn't the way to do it. We're in a real tight airspace corner here. Once the tower's closed, it's shorter, it's easier, it's more convenient to make a right traffic and come in here. But unless there's a real good reason to do that, shouldn't be doing that. The other thing to remember too, with right traffic, and that it's one thing to learn how to do it right. We see people get all messed up when they're doing right traffic because they're looking over their shoulder that they're not used to doing. They crowd the runway, blow through final, the common errors. And it just reminds me of something that came up. We had a FAST team meeting the other night. We must all remember, though, IFR airplanes do not have priority at non-towered airports. I know we're going to get to non-towered in a little while, but just because that's the way that's most convenient to circle from your approach, that doesn't mean that's the way to go in. So, well, maybe we'll hold that one. But
yeah, and speaking of that, non-towered airport operations was our last episode. So if you didn't catch that, we got really down into the details on that one. So be sure you go back and listen to it after you listen to this episode. All right, James, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, so over at where I'm at, GKT, Gatlinburg Pigeon Forge Airport, this is prior planning type stuff, but always good to look at the info and the notes before you fly somewhere. Like where we're at, the right traffic is exclusively for helicopter traffic. And so if you don't know that, you're flying right into a hornet's nest of helicopter training. So really a good idea to, before you go fly somewhere completely unfamiliar, look at the notes.
Yes, always look up that airport information. One tip to my fellow flight instructors, if you are at a towered field, and if you can take your student out where it's not very busy, maybe really early in the morning when the tower first opens or before they close at night, give them a little call before you get out to the plane and ask them to kind of, throw the book at your student and give them all different directions. Maybe you have left pattern on one circuit, and then the next one have them change to a right pattern. Give them all these different instructions because you never know what they're going to get when they're out in the airplane by themselves. All right, let's move on. Number 4, a Class Bravo clearance. So for our airline pilots, that's daily life for you. But for some of us as student pilots or even private pilots, we don't have the opportunity or not able to get into a Class Bravo very easily. I know for us out in Hawaii, Honolulu was a Class Bravo, but it was pretty easy VFR to get in and out of it. But that was my first experience. I mean, we kind of skirted in my private pilot training the Memphis Class Bravo, but we wanted to stay away from all that FedEx traffic. Tom, why don't you talk about getting a Class Bravo clearance for the first time?
So that's where I got lucky. I did all of my training in a Delta that was right below a Bravo. So I'm in the Tampa Bay area, and this whole airspace is like that. We got clearances almost immediately. So, squawk codes were given regularly, even just to stay in the pattern. So being able to get out and get a clearance, for me became easy. But I realized that for students, a lot of the ones that I have, or learners as we call them now, I have to take them out and make sure that they see the flow, really understand what the CRAFT acronym stands for, and, getting that clearance and writing it down correctly, and knowing how to utilize that and what information they're going to need as they take off. And I know that for a lot of learners that I've had that have come from non-towered fields, they're a little shy with doing that. They really don't want to talk to somebody, and they get a little bit nervous when it's like, I got to pay real close attention here, and I don't want to screw this up. And that feeling sometimes keeps them away from even going to a Class Bravo.
That's right. That's one of the things that, when my students in the past, maybe if they haven't had the chance to do that yet, I'll just say, as soon as you get your private pilot check ride done and that monkey's off your back, let that be one of the first or second flights that you do with your instructor. And you're going to have to build some time anyway for your instrument rating. So that'd be a great one for us. Honolulu was a good 75 miles away. So it was a perfect cross country flight, go under the hood for a little bit and get that Class Bravo clearance for the first time. James, do you have anything you want to add to this one?
Yeah, I'd just say, for a student, if they're going to go fly to a Class Bravo, you could already chair fly it. What are you going to ask for, and then what are you expecting to receive? So I already know where I'm at. McGee Tyson is the Class C, and similar ops, but I would do the same thing if I was at Nashville or Charlotte. If I ask for a VFR, I can almost guarantee I know they're going to tell me to fly VFR for a VFR clearance at a certain altitude, similar to where I asked them for, and they're going to give me a squawk and a heading. So, I mean, it's just those are things you can already plan on, and a frequency, right? So I already know pretty much what they're going to come back with. The squawk is going to be different. So prior planning and understanding of that, you can be really ready.
Yeah, I feel like the benefits of chair flying and role playing has been a common theme in some of these episodes. Carl, you train a lot of airline pilots coming into your airline. Do you come across many first officers that have never flown into a Class Bravo or not much experience?
Absolutely. Some people have never flown IFR, actual IFR. So there too is something interesting. But yeah, actually, amazingly enough, every so often you will see that. Most of them like Class Charlie. But usually by the time they get to the majors, they actually have seen that. But every so often we get cadets and you get people that come through that, haven't seen the Class Bravo airspace. A little bit different because they don't, actually it's kind of like a more of a VFR type of operation, Class Bravo. They don't know what to do to get into Bravo if they're operating VFR. Say we're out doing some training and stuff like that. The one thing they are used to doing is getting a clearance to fly IFR, because that's all we do is fly IFR. So it's kind of interesting that you ask them, well, how did you used to fly out of this Bravo before you got to the airlines? They said, well, we always flew IFR. We've never done VFR. So interestingly enough, they may never have had that experience.
Interesting. All right, before we move on to the next one, Tom, you have one more thing to say?
Yeah, I was just thinking along the lines of clearances. One of the things that occurred to me as well is VFR flight following, which could probably be a topic well within itself of picking it up and how to do it. But the fact of just writing down a clearance and being able to talk to a controller and be able to get services from that controller based on how you're going to reply to that and how you're going to respond to that is important as well, and to practice that, to pick it up. There's our wonderful friend Jamie Beckett from AOPA used to say that picking up flight following was like ordering pizza. Where am I? What do I want? And how do I get it there? And it's like, and you can write all these things down and run with it. So that occurred to me as well.
Yeah, and I think that's an excellent suggestion for a future episode, because, that's something that I didn't do very much as a student pilot. And maybe we could get one of our friends from the Opposing Bases podcast on here to talk about flight following. You can work on that, Carl. All right, the next one, getting a courtesy car. Now, lucky for me, training in East Arkansas, Southeast Missouri, West Tennessee is full of little airports with great diners, courtesy cars. And so you just land the plane, grab the keys under a rock, and, go do your thing, grab your $100 hamburger, bring the car filled back up with gas, and you're on your way. When I got to Hawaii, there is not a place that has this. No FBOs, no flight schools, anything. And so we would describe this to the students, and they just were like, are you kidding me? And you don't have to pay for it. They just trust you with it. And I'm like, yeah, it's all on the honor system. So James, why don't you talk about getting a courtesy car?
Yeah. So first thing you do when you start planning a cross country is you call the FBO and make sure they have a courtesy car. That's number one. And then if they have a limit, right? Some of them over here, they've got a 1 hour limit, and then you got to kind of figure out from there you're planning where you're going to go to lunch or what you're going to do, and how serious they are about that 1 hour limit, right? So, what about if we go a little bit long? What about if we want to go to the other side of town? So every FBO is a little bit different. I personally like food, so if I'm flying somewhere and they've got a courtesy car, I want to go to lunch and find the best spot possible. So oftentimes you can pay a little bit more, give them a tip or whatever, and they'll let you keep the car. But oftentimes it's based on how many cars available. If you show up the minute and just go up to the front desk and ask them for a courtesy car, very likely that the guy that's coming in 45 minutes later with the jet already beat you to it. So they're like, we're already reserving this for these guys, prior to you. But if you call them ahead, typically you can get it to where they'll pretty much save it for you. So those are my 2 tips. That pro tip, if you're ever going to go back there, make sure that you put gas in it, just to be nice. I know a lot of people that don't, but I typically try to be nice and put gas in it and leave a tip, just because next time when I take it for 2 hours, they won't immediately say, heck no, get out of our face. Get out of here, kid. The other way you can do that is buying gas from the FBO. These are soft skills. If you want to borrow their courtesy car and you say, well, you guys hit the, whatever, and we're not going to buy any gas and we don't want to pay any sort of fees, and you're going to be super standoffish, they're going to be less inclined to give you their courtesy car. So the nice way to do it, call them ahead, buy gas from them, and if you want to put gas in it, depending on how far you're going. So those are my tips.
Great tips. I think most of us do fill up the car, but I think adding that extra tip and then for sure doing the common courtesy of topping off with gas from the FBO there. Carl, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, I call it courtesy car courtesy, and that's not just putting gas in the car. I may not fill it up, depending how big the car is, right? And by the way, we should just do a whole episode on our favorite courtesy cars. Mine, of course, was the El Camino. But the one thing you want to do is leave it cleaner than you actually received it. And we had a big discussion on this today at the FBO, and that many times when people find out you have a courtesy car, they'll come in and use a courtesy car and not buy anything or leave a tip or put gas in it. So what happens is this, and it happens throughout the FBO networks, is they wind up telling people, hey, if you want the courtesy car, by the way, it's an hour limit and there's a 10-gallon minimum or something like that. So that's how those minimums get started. So best thing to do, like you said, is leave it cleaner, leave it in the right spot, and make sure you put a little bit of gas in it or give them some money for gas.
Something my mama always taught me is when I babysat for somebody or went to somebody's house for a sleepover or something, always leave everything better than the way you found it. So I think that's just a good principle to live by. FYI, plane renters also. All right, moving along. So the next one I mentioned earlier in the show is handling in your aircraft at max gross weight. Now that's kind of an odd thing to say, an experience you don't have as a student pilot. Sometimes you might, maybe you take some family members with you up in the back seat, have your family members on one of your lessons. But I remember the first time, and I was at the Hana airport picking up a couple who were friends of mine, and we were going to fly down to Kona on the Big Island. The wife was kind of small, and she wanted to fly up front with me because she was a rusty private pilot, had not flown in a while. But her husband was bigger and taller, kind of a bigger guy. And then they brought all these groceries, and they had an organic farm there around Hana. And so they brought all these groceries and coolers full of meats and foods, loaded up the back seat and the baggage. I did the weight and everything, but I was just right there at about, 2,500 pounds in a Cessna 172. We had the 180 horsepower STC. But when I took off, and, Hana's about a 3,200 foot runway. But when you take off, it's ocean, lava rock and ocean on the departure end. That plane did not want to climb out. It was, an AvCG, really heavy. John had the same experience. We went to go pick them up. We thought they would have eaten all those groceries coming back, but they brought back as much as they brought with them. And so coming back into Hana, he was just like, wow. I thought I was going to have to just take them to the Class Charlie Kahului, the bigger airport with a longer runway. But anyway, does anybody have anything that they want to add on that about operating your aircraft really heavy?
I was going to say that, it was definitely a surprise the first time that I operated an aircraft close to gross max weight. It was very surprising how poorly it performed. Now, I live here in Florida. We deal with, high density altitudes all the time. And but it was really surprising how poorly that airplane performed. When you're used to it shooting up and get up off the runway and, in a Cessna 172 and you're climbing 700 feet per minute to 1,000 feet per minute. And then all of a sudden it's like, you're trying to maintain 75, 80 knots and you're barely climbing at 200-300 feet. And it's kind of daunting because we have very large antennas around here and stuff like that. We have the one to the north of me here we call the pig sticker. And, it's like, it seems like they point you straight at it every time you take off too, so trying to get up and get around that stuff. But it was definitely surprising operating. It wasn't that the plane couldn't do it. It was just, it performs a lot differently than it would say when you got half tanks and just you and another passenger.
And I think that's part of it too, is you may be operating the airplane within limits, but when it's just so different than what you're used to, it can kind of take you aback, like you said, Tom. Speaking of that, let's talk about, as we're talking about taking off and landing, let's talk about landing with a tailwind. And that, again, that's not something you really think about, but until you experience it, especially if you have like a 6, 7, 8, even 9 or 10 knot tailwind, and maybe you're at a towered airport. That's a lot of times where this happens, and they haven't switched the runways yet, and the wind's picking up and picking up and picking up. We experience this a lot in Maui. The northeast trade wind would switch to a Kona wind, or would have some wind shear there, and they'd let it get finally to a certain point before they switch the runway. But if you are on a short field, especially, then you may kind of be taken surprise and taken aback. Bill, why don't you talk about that, about landing with a tailwind?
Yeah, sure. We do see that here at Leesburg. We're tucked in real close to Dulles on one side of the airport and a very noise sensitive area on the other. So it's always a battle. Tower has one way they like to do things. The anti-noise people have another way they like to do things, and controllers have a limit. They can treat a calm wind runway up to, I think it's 5 knot tailwind, in their handbook. And when they're running the IFRs and they have to do it, they'll just keep doing it. And the big guys, the Pilatuses and the jets and everything, they don't mind. A 5 knot tailwind is no big deal for them. But for a student that hasn't experienced it, that effect, a 5 knot tailwind on a Cessna or a Cherokee, is a big chunk of your airspeed. The airplane starts to handle differently. You get wheelbarrowing, all kinds of interesting things like that a student or a low-time person may not have ever experienced before. So don't be shy, right? If that's not going to work for you, speak up, talk to the towers like, hey, listen, that's a 5 knot tailwind. Maybe it's good for you, but it's not good for me. I mean, I fly a tail dragger. We are very sensitive to tailwinds. Do not like that at all. So, we'll pipe up and say, nope, sorry, I want to go the other way.
Yes, for sure. Don't be afraid to speak up. I mean, the controllers are there to work with you. They're not your enemy. They're not out to get you. So just tell them unable. Tell them you need to go around, that you prefer another runway. And, this is a little extreme, but, go land at another airport if you have to. If you don't have the option, and it's going to cause something that's unsafe. All right. Another thing that we train as instructors. So if you go into your instructor training, you are required to have spin training. Now, I personally think this is something that student pilots should experience at least once with their instructor or with somebody who's experienced with spin training, and just to see, what actually happens. We talk about it. I do a lot of mock oral check rides online, and that's something that I always cover in those mock check rides is, spin recovery. What happens, aerodynamically when the plane is going into a spin, because that's something you're probably going to be asked on your check ride. But to actually do it and see it, I remember the first time I went to a spin during my spin training, and just even the wing over before we even started going towards the ground, I just didn't realize how just drastic that was. And then I loved it after that. And I was like, let's do some more. So let's talk about the spin training. Tom, you want to talk about spin training?
Sure. So as an instructor, I definitely had to go through that. And, one of the gifts that I gave myself through my training was, early on, I bought a desktop simulator. So I got the SciTech controls, the throttle quadrant, and the yoke, and the rudder pedals, and I think I was running Flight Sim 10, and I would redo all of my lessons and everything in there. One of the things I did in there was spins, and the spin training that I was doing in the simulator was kind of weird, because what it would do is if you would spin the Cessna 172, it would spin perfectly to the left. It would just literally flop over and do the spin. The right spin in that simulator was always a flat spin. Always. It just would not spin. It would just automatically go into a flat spin. It would let you recover, but that's all it ever did. So, but what I saw on that simulator and then what I finally did in the plane were like two completely different things. And I had the same experience as you. I was expecting this to be this really awful, drastic maneuver. And when I finally did it, I went, wow, that was pretty cool. Let's do it again and again. And, I would say learning that early on, I agree. I've always been an advocate of learning that early on. I know the FAA decided that you only have to do it as an instructor, but I see the benefit of everybody learning how to do a spin and how to recover from it. Depending on the airplane, the airplanes I've done most spins in are 172s and 152s. They want to fly by themselves so much that they actually recover from spins very, very well. I was a CSIP for a while, so in a Cirrus, obviously, it's not authorized for spins, and that's why they have the parachute system, because it may not recover from a spin. So that was another form of training that I had to implement there, too, is understanding and recognizing spins for students and what they were going to do in that case, as opposed to trying to get out of it. Now it's pop the chute and everybody lives. So, yeah, I think spin training early on would definitely be helpful. And if you can get your instructor to bring you up and put you in a spin early on, all the better for you.
That's right. And there are a lot of inexperienced instructors who may not feel comfortable quite yet in, taking your students up and doing some spin training. So, just work with them. They probably know somebody who has some experience with that. And maybe you can go together for a lesson or there's a lot of aerobatic schools out there that will do upset recovery training. You can even get scholarships for upset recovery training. I've applied for one before, didn't get it, but I'd like to go do that sometime, to do like a weekend of upset recovery training. So all good stuff, and it just makes you a safer pilot. Carl, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, as far as the spin training is concerned, I think doing it with a instructor that has aerobatic training is important. Also doing it in an aircraft that's certified for spins. At the school I worked at, we had some instructors decide to do some spins in an airplane that wasn't certified. Fortunately, they didn't recover, and that was the last spin they did, and it was very unfortunate to lose those two people. But make sure that you actually are in an aircraft that you can spin. And I get, people are afraid of it, and just make sure you're in a plane that you should spin and also that you can spin, and you're with an instructor that understands what they're doing. So it's great. I think the suggestion about going to a school is just terrific, any type of an aerobatic school.
Yeah. All right, James, you have something you wanted to comment on?
Yeah, just with spins, I think a lot of people are just students are just terrified of it. My first experience was actually when I was way back getting my private pilot's license on my mock check ride. We were doing power on stalls, and I inadvertently spun it with my instructor, and we flew back silently and unpacked that. But the next time I encountered it was Air Force pilot training in the T6 of the 1,000 shaft horsepower aircraft, and they said, "All right, we're going to do spins," and we did it frequently in that airplane. And it just most airplanes are designed to recover smoothly from a spin. Typically, if you neutralize the controls and pull the power back, it wants to recover, and so it's not a terrifying any sort of terrifying maneuver. It's good to see. So that's my 2 cents.
All right. Well, the next thing we're going to talk about is having a real life diversion. So this is something that you talk about with your instructor. You're going to talk about this on your check ride even, and you're going to have all these different scenarios. What would you do if this? What would you do if this happened to you? And a lot of times we talk about, flying VMC into IMC, inadvertently the visibility gets bad, and what do you do? How to safely look at your instruments, trust your instruments, make that 180, get back into visual conditions. But you may have something else that happens. Maybe you have a sick passenger. a lot of times it's, after you get your private pilot check ride done and on into more experience, that you start having these different diversions, and you've got to make that decision-making process, pretty much on the spot. What am I going to do? How far do I need to go? Where am I going to go? Do I have enough fuel to make it there? So, James, you want to talk about that? You said you had a story about a real-life diversion.
Yeah, so based off, you're talking a little bit going from VMC to IMC. I mean, I would encourage, a lot of my owners are working on their customers that own airplanes are working, their private pilots are working on their IFR rating right now, and especially in the Cirrus or any other well-equipped aircraft, they just become accustomed to, there's the avionics become a crutch, and they'll push it where they think they have a hole or something like that. So I think the mindset of taking a step back and, typically incidents or accidents occur when things start to stack up. And so a little bit, of weather that you're not necessarily comfortable with, traffic may be busy, something happened at home, all these things start to stack up on each other, and that's when something tends to happen. And the FAA has identified it. So I would say that is one of those things that I'd encourage airplane owners and pilots to, especially if you're at that level, to take seriously. Typically, though, prior to when you take off, if you're planning this out in your flight, typically if you're a VFR pilot, it's going to be something maintenance related, or you get there and there's something that you didn't necessarily plan for, whether or not they had somebody, let's say, land a plane, gear up on the runway, and they shut the runway down, and that just happens to be when you're showing up. So being familiar with things that are around you, different airfields around you, and having a backup plan is just always really good.
All right. Carl, I'm curious, we're talking more in the arena of general aviation, but how common is it to have to divert flying the airlines?
It's actually fairly common for medical and disruptive passengers usually. So it's that's the biggest thing is diversions, and especially when you're say you're out over the water and you're 500-600 miles from an airport. You have to make that decision, and it's a tough decision sometimes, either to divert or maybe not to divert. And so there's a lot of other things that you have to take into consideration when you're doing that. Another thing to think about is if you are flying, say, out in the remote area or over the water, maybe putting it down might be the best thing. And what's a situation when you're on fire? So whenever we have a fire in the back of the airplane or something smoking, a laptop or whatever, that's something going through our head, because it might be best to put it in the water or in a remote area. You're going to burn up anyway, so it's time to get on the ground. So those are all kind of things. Your diversion may not be to an airport sometimes, and maybe to a spot other than off airport, either in the water or in a field somewhere. So it's something you definitely want to think about often, that's for sure.
Yeah, speaking of that, John and I were up flying our new to us Cessna 150 yesterday, and we're at our new home airport. And as he was flying, we were just doing some pattern work, just testing out the avionics and everything. But my eyes were just darting everywhere. Okay, where's some places I can put it down if we have, loss of power on takeoff. And on one departure end, we had some pretty good options. The other end, not so good. So last night before I went to bed, I just did a deep dive into Google Earth, just kind of zooming in. Okay, now I want to go drive over there and check these places out and see if, those are viable options. So, okay, good discussion on the diversions. Now, the next one, experiences that you may not have as a student pilot, but this is one that may be easy to do. And sometimes as instructors, we just get so busy, we don't think about it. And that is visiting a control tower. So I want to ask Bill or Tom, do you, at your flight schools, do you give your students opportunities to visit a control tower during their private pilot training?
Yeah, absolutely. We do. Our tower's right there. So for, small tower, that's great. It's easy. You can really meet the folks you talk to every day that are right there, learn that controllers are people too, get to see what it looks like from their viewpoint, where you're coming from, what training operation looks like. If you're at a bigger airport, maybe a little more difficult, but the ATC facilities are good with this. Not just the tower, the local tower. If you're near a TRACON or a center, you can go there too. Usually takes a little bit more of a process. They have to do some security things and everything, but most of the facilities will have a contact. You give them a call, let them know you've got some people coming, and come on over on some rainy day or some slow day, and check out the radar room or the big tower and see what it looks like from the other side. And you can learn about. Everybody likes it. I know a lot of controllers. You guys know I used to be a controller, right? And we love talking back and forth with each other. Everybody learns about each other's problems and how they can make life easier. That's everybody's people and want to get the job done. So it works out real good.
That's been my experience as well. I mean, every airport we've been at, even the area controllers, always so welcoming. I mean, we will call in advance and say, hey, what are the best times to go? Don't just show up unannounced, but call ahead, make an appointment. Again, a lot of times, depending on the airport, early in the mornings is usually good. Or if there's a push during the day, after that push is over with. And, a lot of the controllers are pilots themselves or even instructors, and they would love the opportunity to help your students learn or help you learn as a private pilot. I know at our flight school on Maui, that was kind of like the reward after your first solo. You'd fly your first solo and then would go up and just the student and the instructor go up and do a tour of the control tower. And a lot of times we would be up there, 30, 45 minutes, and they would answer our questions between, their interactions with the pilots. And it was just great. And they were always so good to let in different groups like the 99s and EAA groups up. So yeah, don't be afraid. Just give them a call and ask and set something like that up. All right. The next one is operating out of an FBO. Now, if I someday had a fancy pants airplane like that's behind James, and if you're listening, you don't see it, but he's got a nice, I think that's a Cirrus behind you. You may get to go into a nice FBO like Millionaire or someplace like that. So, Carl, talk about working with an FBO. I kind of make a joke about that, but we can dream. But what about working with an FBO? A lot of student pilots they have no clue what to do.
Yeah, and I think you alluded to it. It's specifically the bigger FBOs, right? So the most important thing is when you walk in the door of an FBO is stand up straight, walk in with confidence, because you're flying that 172. I don't care if that Falcon's sitting on the ramp. I'm just as important as the other guy. So that's something that I think a lot of us have this, self-confidence issue when we walk into these big places. Is like, I'm a customer too. When the air traffic controller talks to the big jet, they talk to me the same way, just like the FBO manager should talk to me the same way. Sometimes we don't feel like we get that service, but the most important thing is to realize that you're a customer just like everybody else. But there are some things about operating around an FBO that you have to take into consideration. FBOs have these beautiful things, like where we are here. We have free food. Free coffee, water. You have nice rooms. You can sit down. There's places to relax and watch movies if you want. But the other part of that, and you can go ahead and use all those facilities, right? You can use them and hang out with the guy who's flying the Citation, even though you're in your Cessna 172. But just realize that, like we said with the courtesy car, maybe leave it a little bit cleaner than when you got there, or make sure that you don't make a mess. Also understand that the FBO, look at their perspective. They're dealing with customers from all sorts of backgrounds, people that have small planes, big planes, and they do want to treat everybody the same. But they do also realize that there can be a bit of a struggle or a challenge on the ramp depending on where you're parking. So make sure when you do come to an FBO, you ask them ahead of time, hey, where do you want me to park? A great way is to get on the frequency. And that's what we talked about doing that research right beforehand. Get on the frequency. Hey, where do you want me to park? And they'll tell us, hey, we'll be right here. We'll be outside with a marshaler, no problem. And it's the coolest thing, though, when you get pulled up and you're You're 172, and they roll out the red carpet and they say, "Hey, how are you today? What can we do for you today?" So that's the biggest thing is actually being courteous, understanding that there's a lot of things in an FBO. So I would actually recommend you going to one of these nicer FBOs to see what kind of facilities they have. We have showers even here. There's lots of different things you can do. You can actually take a nap in different rooms. You can actually, if you have a meeting, you can rent a room for a meeting. But it's a different environment. You also have, we talked about courtesy cars. There's rental car companies, but then again, there's rental car companies that only actually work with specific FBOs. And these rental car companies aren't like Hertz and Avis that we've talked about. You're driving some really nice cars out. And it's more of a concierge service where they actually bring you the car and they say, "Here, Mr. Valeri, here is your car." So those are the kind of things you want to work on. And don't be afraid to ask if you don't understand how things work. And I do know that there are some people at FBOs that kind of look down their noses at you, but yeah, hey, you're a customer too, so just remember that. So yeah, we're operating around the FBO. There's probably a lot of YouTube videos out there about it. You're a customer too, and if you're afraid, just ask. It's just like when you go to dinner at one of those fancy restaurants. What do you do with all that silverware that's in front of you? Work from the outside in. That's a good thing to rule of thumb there. Just like with an FBO, don't be afraid to ask in a tone that, hey, you're confident enough to realize that you're a customer too. So that's my advice on operating an FBO. I'd be curious to hear if anybody else has their thoughts about operating out of an FBO.
Yeah, that's some wonderful advice. And I don't know, I do feel like James, even though I gave him a hard time about his airplane back there, I feel like James is someone who frequents a lot of FBOs. Do you have anything you want to add, James?
Yeah, so we all put our pants on one leg at a time, right? So keep that in mind. But neat things are typically any of those FBOs, they've got a frequency too. So you can also call them and let them know you're 15 minutes out. Make sure they have that rental car ready for you. So those are some tips. Or if you got a quick turn, let them know that, hey, I'm going to be landing in 15 minutes and we're going to need AvGas, and they can have that truck ready to go for you. Typically, the bigger spots are going to have that for you. I would say it's not the time to. It depends, right? If you're going only through there once, maybe you might consider it. But don't be a taker. Don't unload. If they've got a bowl of mints there, don't unload all of them. Fill your buckets. Don't nickel and dime their. They've got fees, and you're going to be upset with them. But their business. They're trying to make a living, and So typically, how you waive those fees is you buy gas from them. Is how you can get rid of the landing fees or any other associated handling fees. You'll save some time rather than arguing with the front desk person. So I would say being friendly. They're some of the most friendly people that you'll meet across the country, and each one is just so unique. It's really cool. Some of them may have a little bit of a restaurant attached to it. Some of them, they've got a museum attached to it. One of them I know in Amelia Island has, it's essentially a Ritz-Carlton attached to it, right? It's just one road straight to there. And they'll let you borrow a Mercedes, which is really cool. So there's a lot of really awesome FBOs. Be nice, courteous, don't nickel and dime them, and give them a heads up.
I am writing all these down because I've got my big list, and now that I'm back on the mainland doing some flying. And speaking of the landing fees, something else you could do about calling ahead, not just for the rental car, but call ahead and ask about those landing fees because you never know if there may be some big event going on in that city, and the landing fee could skyrocket. I've seen that happen down in Key West. Your landing fee, I can't remember, just like for a single engine piston, let's say the landing fee is $25 at Key West, but if they've got some big music festival going on, I've seen it as high as people complaining about $200, $250. I could be wrong on that, but it was a lot more. And you get there and then, you get ready to take your airplane and leave, and you've got this huge bill to pay. So call ahead, find out, make sure there's no other landing fees. A good thing to call and, find out, like Carl said, those best practices ahead of time, because you may have some questions. Maybe you have a lot of experience flying into FBOs, but maybe this is a new one that you're going to. So always call ahead and do your research. All right, we've got just a couple left. When you go into the FBO, you're probably going to get marshaled in by some of the line guys. They're out there waving their hands or their lit up sticks. I don't even know what those are called. So you've got to know what those hand signals mean so you can park in the right place. I saw this just yesterday. Someone was coming in to the FBO where our 150 is based at. And the line guys out there, they're directing traffic, they're doing their marshaling signals, and I made a mental note to myself, hey, I need to brush up on that and make sure I remember, because I've gone, in Arkansas and Hawaii, nobody ever marshaled. It was just kind of the wild, wild west out there. You did what you wanted to do. So I need to brush up on that personally. Tom, you want to talk about marshaling signals?
Yes, and that was something early on that, I think I was lucky to learn. I was required to. So they handed me the Aeronautical Information Manual, and all of the signals are in there. And my instructor pulled up the page and said, "Here you go, and you need to familiarize yourself with these so that you don't chop somebody up with the spinny thing that's on the front of the plane." So when they tell you to stop, you need to know what that means. When he puts up an X in front of you, you stop what you're doing right now. So learning that early on, I think, is really, really important. Because it's an airplane. We're flying because we all started with the old saying, right? Give me a mile of road, you'll go a mile. Give me a mile of runway, I'll go anywhere I want to go. So the fact is that I can go anywhere I want to go, and I'm going to end up in places that are going to have marshals, that are going to have FBOs, and people that are going to guide me in and direct me to a specific spot to park. And if I don't know what turn left a little bit or turn right a little bit means, and even into bigger airplanes now, what does unchalk mean? What does it mean to disconnect the GPU? What does it mean to, left engine start, right engine start? All of those things are hand signals that I need to be able to communicate with somebody that's out in front of the aircraft at the moment. And I started learning that early on. So anybody who's working on a private pilot, I believe, should start to familiarize themselves with the marshaling signals.
Yeah. Carl, do you have anything you want to comment on the marshaling signals?
Yeah, absolutely. I think before the show, I actually asked the FBO, what I should talk about here. And the one thing that he said that he sees the most common is that people turn in the wrong direction. When they're getting the signal to turn, they think that they should be turning one way, but they turn the other way, or they feel that they're doing the right thing and they're not. So make sure you understand, and I know people are listening to this, that you understand what left and right means and who it's in reference to. And when you're parking, that you're parking towards the person that's marshaling you and not behind them, if that makes sense. And so that's where, just that type of thing and figuring out how to get in there. And I think that we should just do like a whole episode on how to operate around FBOs, because there's so many little things that you can do. But the biggest thing is marshaling. I mean, that's turn left, turn right, starting an engine. Also, what's the signal for fire? Do you remember what that is? All those type of things. And that's something that I think is incredibly important. Of course, I do that all the time when teaching at the airline, because that's one of the things we don't a lot of times have the ability to do that. What's a wave off? Those kind of things. So yeah, absolutely. I think that's very, very important for us to understand, is how to be marshaled. And it's honestly, it's not just at the FBOs. I'd like, you go to air shows, you go to fly-ins, someone's marshaling you in. It's a lot of times it's Civil Air Patrol. So it's not just the FBOs, it's everybody out there. So make sure you go out and take a look. What are the marshaling signals? Go check it out again. Watch a YouTube video on it.
All right. I am making a mental note to study up on that out of all of these. That's my homework for this week. All right. Well, we are about out of time. We've got time for one more. And Tom, I want you to take this one. And it is what we talked about in depth on our last episode, and that's non-towered airport operations. But if you're doing your private pilot training at a towered field, then going to a non-towered airport can seem a little tricky, anxious, not quite knowing what to do. Some of the procedures are different. So talk about that for a minute, Tom.
Sure. So, and as I said earlier, I grew up and did my initial training in a Class Delta that was below a Bravo and was a very busy airspace. And, I just thought that that's the way that it was until I got out into a non-towered airfield, went on a cross country. And to me, the non-towered airfield was like the Wild West. It was very daunting. It was like all of a sudden I didn't have anybody to talk to. There was nobody giving me any separation. I was on my own. I was running into, and even beyond getting my private, I was running into people that were miscommunicating, that were just nilly-willy coming into the pattern, people that weren't communicating at all. There'd been more than once where an airplane showed up and all of a sudden I had no idea he was there and never heard him on the radio, not once. And that to me was like really scary. So I make it a point now to take students that are predominantly in a towered environment and bring them to non-towered fields for whatever, pattern work or whatever, but just to spend as much quality time there as I can, and vice versa. I've got a lot of learners that are learning in the non-towered environment, and they're completely daunted by having to talk to somebody. They're like, oh, no, I'm afraid I'm going to do something wrong. I'm going to get in trouble. And so it eases their anxieties as well. So the non-towered field topic goes both ways. It's the one, wherever you grow up at, the other one's going to be the one that's going to be uncomfortable. And to make sure that you get the best of both worlds throughout your training, and request it. You're allowed to, your instructor works for you. Specifically ask them to take you to where it is that's different from where you are. That makes sense.
Yeah, and I think that's great advice for all of these, Tom. That's a great way to kind of end this episode and in this topic. If you don't feel comfortable doing any of these things, just be honest with your instructor, with your flight school, and say, hey, will you take me to go do this? Will you, at least at minimum, explain this to me? So we're going to have these listed in the show notes, and that's going to be your list, and kind of your homework assignment is maybe take 1, 2, or 3 of these that you've not ever experienced, or maybe you haven't experienced in a long time, and get back up in the air and go try some of these things out. Go top off your own fuel, or go grab a $100 hamburger and grab a courtesy car, and just get out there and have some fun flying. All right. Thanks, guys, for all of the input. And Carl, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
All right. Thanks, Leslie. I really appreciate that. That was awesome going through that whole list there. So let's move on to the after landing checklist. In our after landing checklist, we're going to start with the picks of the week. And let's start with Tom. Tom, what is your pick of the week?
Yep, good get to my mic button. So yeah, I was playing with this device the other day. So this is called AirText, and it's a device. It's a portable device you can put in the aircraft, and they have different levels that you can subscribe to. But it's basically, you can have it for texting, or it'll even give you limited email services, also for weather services. So digital ATIS I can pick up. And I've used this device in several different aircraft. Like I said, it is portable. So I've used it in a Learjet at 450, and it worked great. I've used it in a Navajo at 17,000 feet, and it worked great. And I've used it in a Cessna 182 at 2,000 feet, and it worked great. So it's quite a handy little device. You can get onto I got their website in there, so you can go and check them out. And I talked to these guys at Sun and Fun. I ran into their booth. They were there, and met the owners of this company. I only got to spend a few minutes with them, but they were actually surprised when I told them that I was using it at 450. They were actually kind of blown away by that. They were like, what? We haven't got a lot of research on that. And I was supposed to go back and kind of fill them in on some of the things I was learning off of it, and I just haven't had the chance to do so. But handy little device, and I thought it'd be a great pick of the week, and I'll pass.
Wow, thanks, Tom. That's actually pretty cool. So a little more research for them. I look forward to hearing about that in the future. Let's see. I'll do the next pick of the week, and my pick of the week is actually someplace that I went, which is a piece of aviation history, and that is the TWA Hotel in JFK Airport in New York. Oh my gosh, that was one of the most amazing places I've been. Luckily, the company I work for owns a part of that, and I get to go there quite often. And the neat thing about it is the fact that there's aviation history that you can see, read, feel, and touch, and go inside. You can actually go inside a constellation. I know Kermit Weeks has one here in Florida, but you can actually go in there, and it's set up just like the airplane, but they did a little bit more to it, and they put a bar in there. And if you want to, I think it'd be really cool. Gosh, I think we should do this, is to just have a get together. You can have a party in the Connie. You can have a party in the different parts of the hotel. What's really neat is that they have this hotel set up. It's a real retro look to it, just like it was back in the day. It's the old terminal that they were thinking of tearing down, but a couple companies came together and restored it. You have rooms that a lot of people don't realize are there. There's the Pope room. the Pope came to visit and actually was flown in by TWA, and that was really cool. And you actually get to see that. There's also an exhibit of all the different flight attendant uniforms, pilot uniforms. There's a little shop that you can actually go and pick out your TWA t-shirt. And one of my favorite things is you can actually play real live Twister. There's an actual Twister room. Remember the old game Twister? And you can actually go out there and play Twister. Just if you're older like me, make sure that you can get up after you bend down. But other than that, it's one of those hotels where it brings you back to a time that seems different than today, and it was a time that was absolutely seemed wonderful in life, kind of the golden age of aviation. And they have Juan Tripp's a globe from Juan Tripp, Howard Hughes's desk. There's all sorts of neat stuff. And if you're somebody who loves history or somebody who loves aviation, I think the TWA Hotel is someplace you should visit. In the show notes, twahotel.com. So that's my pick of the week. Bill, what is your pick of the week?
Well, mine is entirely different, but maybe it could be used if you had an older or historical or some sort of airplane. Our airplanes, they get old, they get a little beat up, and, we get those stickers on the panel and on the parts of the airplane, and maybe even on the outside that you want to dress up a little bit. Well, I've been doing that on my old Cessna 170, Sasquatch. It had a pretty boring paint scheme on it, and some decals that I really didn't like when I got it. So Aerographics, they call themselves the original airplane decal company. They can do anything to dress up your airplane. You want original Cessna or Beech or whatever it is, logos to put on that airplane, make it look like it was original again. Placards, those legally required by the FAA stickers that you're supposed to have by your fuel caps that all fall off, they can get you those. Aerographics, the original aircraft decal company, they got everything from original old school Cessna, Beechcraft, whatever it is, logos. They can make custom logos. You want to dress up an RV and look like a warbird, you can do that. Pretty much anything you want. Very nice quality. I've already used them some on my airplane, really liked it. Very responsive company for anything you want to dress up your airplane. Aerographics.
Awesome, Bill. Thanks. I appreciate that. Aerographics, and I've actually had to use them in the past. Real good company. Leslie, what is your pick of the week?
All right, since our co-host Russ is not here today to give a pick of the week for a book, I've got a book for you, and it's kind of off. I usually try to do something educational as my pick of the week, but I want to give a plug for my brother who just released his first book yesterday. It's called Wild Wonder, What Nature Teaches Us About Slowing Down and Living Well. His name is Stephen Proctor. So why does this have anything to do with the Stuck Mic AvCast and general aviation? Well, he is a commercial drone pilot. So the whole book is it's part photography and part essays and thoughts about getting out, being still, getting above the earth, the perspective that we always have when we're flying above the earth, and looking at the earth from the top down, that visual perspective, what it can teach us about the world that we live in, about creation, about spiritual mindfulness, things like that. And so he has quotes, he has some, real life stories. Our grandmother was a pilot. She's in the Arkansas Aviation Hall of Fame. I mean, him being a drone pilot she was part of his inspiration to go into that. So it's just really thoughtfully done. It's something he's worked on for several years. It's a beautiful coffee table book, but it's not just a pretty picture book. It is got some really meaningful dialogue in it. We're very proud of him. You can find it on Amazon, Walmart, Target, Barnes & Nobles, where most books are sold. There's a link to it in the show notes. And then also, if you want to see a short 2-minute book trailer for it, it has some of his cinematography that he does with his drone on the book trailers. So it's called Wild Wonder, What Nature Teaches Us About Slowing Down and Living Well by Stephen Proctor.
Awesome pick of the week. I tell you, go out and check out that video. I'll have it in the show notes. Really amazing photography. Real great job, that's for sure. Thanks, Leslie. And our last pick of the week is James. James, what is your pick of the week?
Yeah, so my pick of the week is Baker School of Aeronautics. They're local to Tennessee, and what they do is take people that have the requirements to test for their A&P, and they get them ready to pass the oral and practical and the writtens. So just if you're an owner of an aircraft and you've ever been considering getting your A&P at some point, and you feel like you have the requirements from doing oil changes or, helping your A&P over the years, you can talk to your local FSDO. They could tell you where you're at. You could get the sign off from the FSDO, and then you go to Baker's, and they'll get you through the actual test. And that's who I did my testing with, and then a lot of people through the military as well that already have the requirements to pass the A&P. They go through Baker's all around the world. So I think they do a really good job. Also do inspectors authorizations as well.
And we appreciate that, James. We appreciate Baker's for actually helping sponsor Sun and Fun. Great people, terrific product that they have. Well, gosh, guys, this has been terrific. A lot of things that I wish I learned as a student pilot. I know a lot of people have. If you have questions, comments, or ideas on other things that we should mention as far as things to learn, stuckmikeavcast@gmail.com. But one of the things I'd like to do, too, is try to get you to go out and check out our Instagram, our Facebook, because one of the things we're trying to do is interact with you more. And what we're going to do is put places where we're going to be, air shows we'll be at, different events we're going to show up at, where the hosts will be. And we're going to put that out on our Facebook page at Stuck Mike AvCast and also on our Instagram. Leslie's actually been helping run all that and is doing a great job. It's been wonderful to see some of the photographs out there. But most importantly, keep that passion alive for aviation. Get out there, do something today that will get you involved in aviation, whether it's looking at one of these books that we talked about or watching a video or going to the airport and talking to people about the FBO. Do something today to get involved in aviation, to increase your passion and to move your life forward in aviation. We really appreciate your listening to us, and we can't wait to talk to you in the next episode. And the next episode will be actually a real fun one. We're going to talk about not non-tower, but see and avoid and collision avoidance tips and tricks. And don't forget to go listen to our non-towered airport operations. So next episode, see and avoid collision avoidance tips and tricks. And don't forget to go check out that non-towered airport operations. We'll talk to you next episode. Safe flying out there.